In this episode, we build a new engine for the daily. So one of the things that I want to do that's a little different with this build is I want to switch it from 3rd gen rods and pistons to 2nd gen rods and pistons. So first thing we got to do is we got to go through our stack of 2nd gen rods and find the best 4 rods out of that stack. And to do that, I'm going to use my dial bore gauge. This will tell me if the holes are out of round or if they're too big or too small. So first here I'm going through and finding all of the ones that are out of round and setting them aside. The ones that I'm left with are all round. The second time I go through those, I find the 4 that are the exact same size. Alright, now we found the best 4 rods that we got. Now it's time to get the bearings in and measure the clearances against the crankshaft. That'll about do it for the rods. So now we can turn our attention to the crankshaft, which just came back from the machine shop after getting a quick polish and is looking absolutely fantastic. So let's grab one of these here micrometers and we will start giving the journals a quick measure so we can set up our dial bore gauge to measure the clearances. Now the way I like to do this is I like to measure it, lock it, then put it in a vise and set the 0 to that journal. Then I measured all of the rods and found out what the clearance of each rod was on each journal. So then I could rearrange the rods so that all of the clearances would be as equal as possible. I got 1, 2, and 3 to be 2 thou clearance, and number 4 was 2 thou and 1/10 clearance, which is actually better than any Saturn motor I've ever pulled apart. Usually they're somewhere between 3 and 4 thou clearance on the mains and the rods, which is significantly over tolerance from any information that I've ever seen. So now that we're done with the rods, it's time to work on the pistons. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to drill some oil relief holes, just like we did in the video where we rebuilt the engine in the wife's winter car. The first thing we're going to do is make 3 evenly spaced marks on each side of the piston. Then we'll head over to the drill press and drill the hole. Now that the holes are drilled, I'm going to hit them with a file real quick to remove any possible sharp edges left behind from the drill. Drilled and the holes deburred, it's now time to measure the piston clearance. We're going to do this the exact same way we did the rods, where we just measure the piston, then we set our dial bore gauge, then we measure our hole. It's Pretty straightforward. The dial bore gauge, when set this way, will read you the clearance number. I'm not actually measuring the diameter of the bores. Now that we've measured the piston and the rods, and we know our clearances, I've used that to determine which bore I want each piston in, and which journal I want each rod on. So what I've done is I've rearranged all the parts to make all of the clearances equal. So all the pistons are 2.5 thou clearance in the bores, and all of the rod big ends are 2 thou clearance on the crankshaft. So now the only thing left to do is to put the pistons on the rods. Before we get started here, the valve relief goes to the intake side. So when you're putting it on the rod, it goes on the side without the bearing tabs. So it'll go on this side here. It'll look. Okay. Alright, now we're going to measure some ring gaps. Now these are generally gapped from factory and I've never had to adjust them, but I just want to make sure that they're in spec and I can measure them in each bore and I can equalize them all. So there's the bore, there's the rings, let's get to measuring. Now that I've measured all the ring gaps and I know which ring I want on which piston, the only thing left to do is to put the rings on the pistons. So let's get at it. Alright, now the only thing to really remember here is that the dot on the middle ring goes up, right? And they say to use the ring spreader tool to install it, but I don't have one and I'm going to roll them on anyway. I'm going to kind of do what Donnie Don't does. I never got that book as a kid, probably because it's from The Simpsons and it's not a real book, but don't do what Donnie Don't does. Now that we're done with the pistons and rods, the last thing to do is to measure the crankshaft main clearances. Now all the parts are cleaned and ready for assembly, and the block went out for a quick hot tank just to make sure that we got rid of all of the honing residue. And I've got everything all nicely laid out, and I'm actually upstairs in my office. And I like to build engines up here for 2 reasons. Reason number 1, it's cleaner. Reason number 2, if I build an engine in the basement, I can't get it out. It's too heavy, and I can't get it up the stairs. So this way I can wheel it out and down my ramp in front of my house and around the backyard. So, not much left to be said here. Let's put this short block together. Alright, so brief update. Now we've got the tie plate all on, the rods, pistons, everything's in. So now it's time to deal with these tie plate inserts. Now, back in the day, there used to be a tool to do them, but that is long since gone and you can't just go buy one. So what I did is I went down to the store and I bought a single socket that the outside matched the outside diameter of the insert. And then I took it down to my buddy Joel at my local machine shop. I had him make me a tool out of that socket by just milling it down and giving me the 2 tanged edges to grab the insert. So, if you're playing with a tie plate in this day and age, this is probably your only option to get the tool to actually torque these inserts down properly. Alright guys, there it is, all assembled. So now the next thing to do in this is we go pull the engine out of the car. And we rebuild the head, put that head on this engine, and put this engine in the car with new transmission, clutch, and flywheel. So, right on. We'll see you next time.